Welcome and thank you for joining. My name is Luke Elston. So I've recently joined CyberOne as of around a month and a half ago as the Microsoft Principal Consultant. So my role here is to do all things Microsoft. Prior to joining CyberOne, I was in Microsoft itself for 8 years as an engineer and architect, and I've also spent 2 years in one of the big four building out their Microsoft practice as well. So I'm quite experienced in everything at Microsoft, and I'm hoping to take you through a bit of a journey today as we go through some of our content. But before I jump into my piece, I'd just like to hand over to Dominic List, who's our CEO, and he'd just like to cover a couple of slides off for you all as well.
Great, thanks, Luke. Thanks for the intro. So I won't keep you too long. I know everyone's here today to sort of get into the details. So I promise I will keep this short and sweet. Just a bit about CyberOne. We've been founded since 2005. We've always been a 24/7, 365 based business in and around managed services. And we've sort of been on the journey ourselves with Microsoft over the years. Obviously, anything more than about 6 or 7 years ago, Microsoft wasn't really a player in the security market. Yes, they had plenty of products, but we know that they weren't really a sort of go-to brand. And obviously that has changed quite considerably, and that's kind of what we're talking about here today. But we were sort of quite an early adopter ourselves of Microsoft technologies, and I think a bit like in the rest of their portfolio, they've really made significant investments, and that's really sort of shining through. Outside of that, obviously we do a lot of your general sort of cybersecurity service offerings. We are CREST approved for penetration testing, CREST approved for incident response. We're also accredited by the National Cybersecurity Centre for incident response as well. From a client perspective, there's several hundred clients that we deal with, but every one of them we try to deliver that personal service, and really doesn't matter what kind of sector you're in, we've got some referenceability and sort of good clients, ranging from small hedge funds right the way up to sort of large global corporations, NGOs, and education and healthcare. So really we sort of cover most of the bases, and really we'll work with any organization that's just really on that journey to try and improve their cyber posture and looking for support along the way. Thanks, Luke. We also have coming up, you might have seen on the emails as well, and thanks again for joining today. We have an actual in-person event at the Shard, so we do these fairly regularly. And again, this will be effectively similar to the format today, but of course we'll have a bit more time. And from an audience perspective, we'll have a sort of a fireside chat at the end where we'll be fielding questions. The last one we did on Copilot was actually very well received, and we actually got into about 45 minutes of Q&A at the end, which was really good. I think which really showed that I think we'd sort of hit the buttons, and the audience were really engaged. So if you would like to join us at that as well, please be our guest, and it would be great to see you in person at those events as well. So just a bit of background, just a bit of scene setting. Obviously, there's a lot of people on this call today, and fairly different sort of backgrounds and roles within your respective companies and entities. So just wanted to sort of set the scene. Obviously, as I said, the meat of this conversation is really about the Microsoft stack in security. But you don't need to be in security or even in IT to see the headlines. Even today, it rolls on the recent cyber attack in the NHS in London, and the very real world impact that has on the NHS. And cries for further blood, putting back critical operations and things like that. And while obviously that's keen to and close to all of our hearts, reality is, of course, that severity of impact has a substantial effect on any business. We have a National Cybersecurity Centre approved incident response capability. And for all my 25 years in business, I've never seen as much devastation in any business as things like a ransomware attack, which can fully encrypt all of your machines and really has the ability to just turn the lights off in a business within the space of a few minutes, and time to recover on that can be weeks, if not months. So it's not surprising that that these things keep on coming up in the press, because these are just almost black swan events for companies, really, and entities. It's a thing that we all feel like we're not going to be the next one, and unfortunately, cybercrime is so lucrative, and more of that later. They just keep rolling forward, and with the advancement of tool sets and AI, that shows no sign of abating. Thanks, Luke. So here's some stats to back it up. Again, we try not to give you too much stats here, but these are some of the sort of stats from Microsoft themselves. So password attacks, you can see going up 10 times volumetric increases in that, and similarly with threat actors tracked by Microsoft as well. So this continues to be a substantial growth market, a substantial growth industry, and despite what us defenders throw at it, it shows no sign of abating. Every time we see a small gang somewhere in some far-flung location has been arrested, it's a bit unfortunately like the war on drugs. It's really it's the tip of the iceberg, really. And aside this as well, of course, this puts increasing burden on businesses. It's where do you start? On average at the moment, organizations use an average of 80 security tools. Take all forms. That could be from basic things like your patching tool to password, encrypting tools, to obviously the cyber sort of technologies that we're going to be talking about today. So again, it's complexity. There's challenges of managing those, and for already stretched IT teams, perhaps working on digital transformation or launching a new e-commerce platform or whatever it is that your business is doing, it's just more load on that IT team, and only as we'll talk about later, you only need to miss one very small thing, and that is that, unfortunately, that's that gap in the window where the threat actor gets in and very quickly can cause absolute havoc right across the business. So whilst the mundane elements still tend to be the sort of least talked about things, they are still some of the most important things you can do at the business, is just get all that good IT housekeeping open. Obviously, the wider market is you've got 4 million people worldwide. So cybersecurity skill sets and knowledge still very scarce. Real world experience even scarcer, and of course there's huge demand for these as well. So businesses, ours included, there's a real war for talent out there, and we have to work hard to hire and retain the best talent that we can retain. And then of course your business leaders, of course, are quite rightly concerned, and obviously, as we talked about earlier, the headlines absolutely fuel that as well. Thanks, Luke. And actually, so this is some sort of fairly latest stats, just really backs up the growth of this industry. It's actually, so if you look at gross domestic product of cybercrime worldwide, it's forecast that it's absolutely $8 trillion per annum at the moment. So that's a phenomenal amount of money, and it's no wonder that not only criminal gangs but nation states are really focusing this on a way to drive revenue. There is a bit of a view by international crime organizations that as much as 60% of the gross domestic product of North Korea is attributable by cybercrime. So and it is funding the growth of their economy. And of course, we're aware of criminal gangs, but also now there's added elements of even slave gangs, unfortunately, in developing countries being drafted in and sort of held captive, and will only be fed if they are contributing to the daily pot of takings by hacking or deploying ransomware. So it continues to be a huge growing issue, and certainly shows no sign of abating. So that's just a bit of sort of scene setting, just to say that actually, and I'm sure, like I say, we all see the headlines, but just to sort of give you a bit of context to the increasing and ongoing persistent focus on cybersecurity, and how your strategies can be best fitted to the appropriate response to the attack and threat that we're dealing with at the moment. Thanks, Luke. Back to you.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Dominic. So let's continue on. So I want to start us on a bit of a journey here, a bit of a conversation around cybersecurity in general, and I'll then loop in sort of the Microsoft elements as we go. So just some interesting stats here for you. So This is actually from a Microsoft report. They do these annually. In green there, we have around 13% of UK businesses are what Microsoft would consider cyber resilient. So it's quite a low number. It's not zero, but it is still not particularly high. And the trend for those organizations is that they prioritize cyber. It's a key part of their organization. They're very prepared in the sense that they have processes and security teams available to react and indeed be proactive when time calls for it. And they're also informed, they keep up to date with the latest developments in cyber. And those are some of the factors that highlight what a resilient organization may be like. On the flip side, we've got 48%, as near on 50% really, of organizations being classed as vulnerable. But then also a really huge amount, nearly 40% there being classed as high risk by Microsoft. You can see some of the trends across those vulnerable and high risk organizations. So cyber's not prioritized, they're under-resourced, underfunded. The organization may have technical debt. They may not do regular vulnerability checks or pen testing. And all of these things add up to make an organization in a potentially an unsecure state. So just some more sobering statistics for you. So the average cost of a data breach in 2023, 3.2 million. So if you think of your organizations and the damage a bill of 3.2 million could cause, it's going to be pretty substantial, right? So we absolutely have to avoid running into these scenarios. This is in regards to data breaches, and that is possibly the worst type of cyber event for many organizations because you have reputational damage. You've obviously got the cost of losing business whilst this is in the media, but then you may have fines after that as well. And that all of this adds up to be very expensive. We know that organizations with, say, 500 or less employees are more likely to be targeted by human-operated ransomware. So there's actually a person driving the attack on your organization there. And that could be because you've been targeted because of the type of data that you hold. Beyond that, some more worrying things across identity, email, and devices. And I would say these are some of the key areas that we need to secure. Everything's getting worse. So 10 times increase on the identity front. 8% of phishing emails get clicked on. To think of that in simple terms, if you've got an organization of 100 people, all you need is one person to click on that phishing email and it's a problem. But if 8% of your organization are doing it, then it's a much bigger problem. And of course, the larger the business, the worse that scales. If you have 1,000 people, 10,000 people, 8% of that is a lot of people. And that means there's a lot of incoming danger to your organization. On the device front, we've got ransomware again being a key and quite worrying area for us. Just some of the stats, and I'm going to illustrate these on the next slide, but breakout time and dwell time are both not great. I'll go into detail about those shortly. Again, in the middle section there regarding data breaches, we're seeing mean times of around 200 days to identify a data breach. If you imagine that right now in this moment, a data breach occurred in your organization, but it took 204 days to identify that fact, and then a further 73 days to contain the breach. Imagine the damage that can be done over that time, and we have to avoid these long, protracted timelines at all costs, really. And then finally, just some data on the number of tools used, sort of based on the organization size. Again, this is some Microsoft data, as well as some from Cloudflare and some of the providers on this slide. So 15 to 20 tools, even for a small organization, it's a lot of tools to manage. And this is part of the danger here, is that you need different skill sets. The tools may not integrate together very well. If you scale it up to bigger organizations, of course, you get more tooling because there's bigger budgets, but that problem doesn't go away. You have all of these challenges with scaling your teams across all these different security tools. And again, this is something we'll talk about in more detail as we go through today's presentation. So I just wanted to illustrate some of what was seen on the previous slide with an attack timeline example. So in green here, unfortunately, there's not much we can do about this phase. This is where the attacker is learning about our organization. It could be that they're looking at LinkedIn It could be that they're looking at our organization website, our blog posts. It could be looking at news media about our organization. And they're preparing for their attack. They're weaponizing in advance of launching their attack on our business. And yeah, like I said, we can't do too much about this. At some point, the attacker is going to start their attack and they will potentially manage to gain an initial entry into your organization. From that period, we have this breakout time. Now, the breakout time is the period from the initial compromise or the initial breach up to the point where the attacker can start laterally traversing around your environment and potentially owning more of your assets, more of your identities, all the way up to a full sort of environment compromise potentially. And this can take place over 1 to 2 hours. So the window here for us as the good guys is very, very small. And this is something that I want us to keep in mind as we go through today's material. Again, after this sort of orange window, we get into the really worrying area, which is that the dwell time, we're looking at averages of around 16 days, although that does vary by industry. And what's happening here is the dwell time is from the moment the attackers entered the organization up to the point that we detect them. So this is sort of a non-data breach example, but again, we're looking at a couple of hours for the attacker to gain elevated access, and then potentially up to 16 days for them to actually conduct their attack. So if their attack is data exfiltration, they've maybe got around 16 days to do that before we realize. And as we can imagine, the damage is potentially done at that point. So again, the green, we can't do too much about. The red, we certainly need to limit how much time the attacker has here. But what I want us to think about really is the orange phase, because we need to expand that. 1 to 2 hours is simply not enough time in a lot of instances for the good guys to take action. So there are things you can do here. Having a SOC, a very capable SOC, can certainly respond and remediate threats in those times. But if you don't have a SOC, then you're going to be in difficulty. And what we need to think about is increasing the time it takes for the attacker in this breakout window, in that orange window. So the data breach occurs again, like I said, it goes off the end of the charts, right? The time frame becomes huge. We're talking 200 or so days until we detect a full data breach. And again, we can imagine the damage done in that time. So I'm sorry to bring you more bad news, but I'm going to raise an interesting point here, which is that as a defender, we have to be right all of the time. And if we think of the inverse of that, the attacker only has to be right once. So we have to try to defend our organizations as best as we can. But if we make a mistake or we don't defend as well as we should, the attacker will take advantage of that. And they only need to do that once. Once they have that foothold into our environment, it becomes very dangerous for us. So we need to think about how we prevent them gaining that foothold. So some of the ways that we do that, I'm actually going to give you the sort of answer to the equation to start off with. The first part of the equation then would be what I would call a minimum viable security baseline. And this is not to say this is the most locked down you can possibly be. This is the minimums. This is the best practices. This is the minimum recommendations to make sure that we're doing the basics well. So this is a very key thing. Dominic touched on it briefly, but we have to make sure that we're not just thinking about the very advanced threats, but we're also thinking about the very simple ones. So do we have MFA enabled for all of our users? Are we managing our devices, whether they're BYOD or corporate owned? Are we securing our networks correctly? How do we manage data? Is data do we have data loss prevention controls in place? These are all the minimal things that we need to be thinking about. Beyond that, we need to break the attacker's playbook. So an attacker will follow generally a set of pre-scripted events. They'll learn about your organization, they'll try to understand your potential weaknesses, and they will try to exploit those weaknesses. If we can reverse that logic and be pragmatic and look at our environment and understand where our weaknesses are, we can reverse engineer that and try to break the attacker's playbook by securing our weaknesses. Beyond that, we need, and this is really mandatory, we have to have a detection and response capability. So this is a SOC, realistically speaking. And then finally, defense in depth. We've probably all heard of this term. We can't just rely on a small set of tools or one tool. We have to have a suite of tools available to us to allow us to have a defense in depth in place. And all of these things will raise the attacker's cost. The idea by raising the attacker's cost is that if we've got two comparable organizations with comparable data sets, and if the attacker was to compromise these two organizations, they would make about the same amount of money from the attack. If one of those organizations is much more secure than the other, which one do you think the attacker will go for? If they start to probe your network and they realize actually you're very mature and it's going to take them weeks to compromise you, but your competitor down the road is unsecure and it will take the attacker hours to compromise them, of course they will go for the low-hanging fruit. So we do not want to be the low-hanging fruit. So just to pivot into some of the technology now, I just want to talk about the concept of best of breed versus best of suite. So I'm not going to read through all of the items here. Please just take a quick glance over at them. The idea here is that a best of breed vendor is a vendor who has a specialist technology. It's usually a very technically deep and very powerful tool. And that organization, that vendor specializes in that particular area of security. So they have a very powerful tool for a particular niche. On the converse, a best of suite vendor would be someone who has many security tools across many areas, and they're taking a more broad approach to security. Now, it's not to say their tools are not deep, but they have a bigger breadth. So this is often the choice that security decision makers are left with: is how do we invest our budget into securing our environment? Do we go best of breed or best of suite? So I just want to bring up on screen, for sake of fairness, some valid choices for all of these areas. I'm sure some of you will have some of these technologies in place. And everything here, this is not a complete list, right? There are, of course, dozens of vendors with tooling across both best of breed and best of suite categories. But what I really want to highlight here is, if we bring in one of the topics of today's conversation, Microsoft, is that they are a best of suite provider, but really they go beyond just best of suite. If we think of their technology stack, it is ginormous. It is bigger than any other security vendor out there, not only just on the security front, but Microsoft have, of course, plenty of non-security products. You can think of the Windows operating system. I imagine most, if not all of you, have Windows devices in your environment, possibly your personal devices at home. That's all Microsoft, right? As well as the entirety of the Azure cloud, as well as things like Copilot, Office 365, and of course the security tools all are sort of embedded and native to these collaboration and productivity offerings that Microsoft also has. So as mentioned, this is what I would call best of suite and beyond. And if you were to adopt all of these Microsoft technologies, that would be a Microsoft first approach. And like I said, although the focus of today is really on cybersecurity, a Microsoft first approach can go well beyond that. And it is quite an important distinction there, and a way that Microsoft can separate themselves from some of their competitors. Okay, so with that said, hopefully I've kind of set the scene well there. Unfortunately, I had to bring in some scary stats, which, we don't want to hear, but it is the truth. And if you're considering a Microsoft first approach, or indeed you're already on your way down this path, then I'm hoping the next part of the presentation will help illuminate some options for you. So let's just start with a simple question. Why Microsoft? You've mentioned at a high level, Luke, why you might consider them, but let's look into more detail. So as I said, in the security industry, Microsoft are highly competitive. So some and not all of their security products are on screen here. We've got Defender XDR, which actually is 4 different products in one. It covers endpoint, email, identity, and cloud apps. You've got Purview on the data protection and classification side. We've got Defender for Cloud, which is all about securing your multi-cloud environments. Think of your Azure workloads, your AWS workloads. They can all be secured with Defender for Cloud. And then last but certainly not least, we've got Microsoft Sentinel, which can ingest data from everything above and give you that seam and saw capability. So just those products alone are substantial. But again, Microsoft is not just a security vendor. They have other technologies. So Azure, okay, an entire cloud. We've got Entra ID. This one does have security elements. Securing the identity is a very key part of any business, but it's an identity provider ultimately. You've got Microsoft 365 and Office 365. You've got Windows, Intune, and of course the new kid on the block, Copilot, which we will be diving into a bit later on. So, what Microsoft is very clearly aiming to do, and to be honest, have successfully done, is have one ecosystem that does everything for you. So they cover all of the main cybersecurity bases. They provide IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS capabilities with Azure. They've got collaboration and productivity tools with M365 and Office 365. They've, of course, got Windows operating system on the client and server front. They've got Copilot, which is, as you can imagine, a huge priority investment for Microsoft, and we're seeing them really invest and push this heavily. It's very clearly their direction of travel at the moment, and AI in general ties in with security, so I'll be looping back around to that a bit later on. And then device manufacturers, people often forget this one. My personal device is a Surface laptop. It's great. It's a direct competitor to Apple's MacBook. So Microsoft are pretty much covering all the bases there. You could have an organization that runs completely off Microsoft technology. And that's clearly their goal, right? To have this single ecosystem. So I'm going to take a slightly novel approach here. This is something that I don't see talked about very often, but I'm actually going to take a look at the stock market for a second. So the S&P 500, this is the top 5 organizations by market cap at the present time. So one thing we can see is they're all tech companies. Apple, of course, leading the charge there. Microsoft itself, its market capitalization is over $3 trillion, which is just an unimaginable amount of money. It doesn't really compute when you think of numbers that large. We've got Amazon, Nvidia, and Google there as well. Now, the reason I'm raising this is, well, there's several reasons, but one of them that I find really interesting is that if we look at Microsoft, they actually compete against the other 4 of the top 5 directly. So with Apple, as I mentioned, they compete on the device level, Surface products versus MacBook and so on. With Amazon, they of course compete with Azure versus AWS. With Google, they compete against the Google Cloud Platform and also the Google Productivity Suite, the G Suite. And then NVIDIA, this might be one that some people are not aware of, but Microsoft is actually now producing their own chips and processors. So Microsoft have developed an AI chip called Maya, and they've also developed a processor called Cobalt. So Microsoft is now getting in on the chip manufacturing. They designed them and have built them themselves. They've actually launched this year, and as the year progresses, it's clearly an area of investment for Microsoft because they don't want to pay Nvidia or similar companies for their chips and processors. Microsoft want to make their own. So this is an interesting development, and really there is no other company who competes at this level against these other giants of our world. And I think that really illustrates the size and power of Microsoft. So just to bring some of those points home, since 2021 up to 2025, Microsoft have committed to investing 20 billion into security. Again, it's an amount of money that we can't really compute in our minds, but 20 billion, that is an awful lot of money. And that's just over a 5-year period. And I think it's very clear, as Dominic nicely illustrated at the start, 7 years ago, Microsoft weren't really a security vendor, but now they are one of the biggest, if not the biggest. And $20 billion of investment will do that for you. Those deep pockets go a long way. Beyond that, because of the financial backing, Microsoft are able to be a visionary in the security space. So they can invest huge sums of money into developing things like Copilot for security that others in the security industry just can't match that investment. And that, of course, gives Microsoft a huge advantage when it comes to being the first to market, to developing their products quickly and into a greater sprawling ecosystem than some of their competitors. And the final point there, this phrase "too big to fail," some people may not like that as a concept, but I think let's be honest here. If for some reason Microsoft did encounter some huge catastrophe and the business was tanking, it would affect the global stock market. It's an American company. The United States would not allow one of their biggest companies to just fail. They would almost certainly be supported. And for that reason, I think it minimizes some of the risks of going with a best of suite approach in that, yes, if you choose a Microsoft first strategy, you're kind of locking yourself into Microsoft. But let's be realistic, they're not going to go anywhere. So it's relatively safe from that perspective. Okay, so we're continuing with our question, why Microsoft? If my take on the stock market idea maybe doesn't float your boat, well, perhaps Gartner, Forrester, and the IDC can sway your opinion because, again, Microsoft is a leader in all three of these organizations' opinions. In terms of Gartner, we're seeing that Microsoft is in the top right-hand corner across endpoint protection, which is, of course, Defender for Endpoint, across the SIEM Magic Quadrant, which of course is Sentinel, and across the access management quadrant, which is of course Entra ID. Again, those three products, we've got an endpoint protection tool, a SIEM and a SOAR in Sentinel, and an IDP in Entra. Those three products are huge. Some organizations only specialize in one of those. Microsoft has all three and many more besides. So you as an organization, Microsoft can't fake these results. This is very much an independent review of where Microsoft technology is at, and they've done well over the past 4 or so years, pretty much since that $20 billion investment came into play. They've been top right-hand corner of all of the relevant quadrants. Okay, so as you can tell, I like some statistics, so I'm going to throw a couple more at you now. So what I took a look at here is I went over the last couple of years and I took a look at Microsoft's digital defense reports for each year. And this top line alone is pretty staggering. So you can see firstly the growth over time. In 2021, Microsoft security tools were synthesizing 24 trillion signals a day. This year so far, and Microsoft's FY is ending in around a month or so, 78 trillion signals a day. That's an awful lot of data, and that data is powering all of the Microsoft security tools. So that alone is ginormous, really. Beyond there, on the endpoint side, again, we've got some additional quite crazy statistics. On the identity side, we have a similar thing. We're talking billions of blocked threats here across the year, which is quite immeasurable. Again, on the email side, similar kind of stats. So all of these first four kind of parts of the table, really, this is all threat intelligence. So when we think of which security vendor has the largest sort of back-end database of all of the threats that exist in the world, all of the detections for them, well, it is almost certainly, and to be honest, as a fact, it is Microsoft. There is no other organization that can match the sheer volume of signals that Microsoft ingests. And the reason, again, is simple. Microsoft technology stack inside of and outside of security is so large that they're collecting so much telemetry. It's not really feasible for anybody else to compete with them. So the way to think about this is Office 365. Guess what? Anonymized telemetry is collected. Windows operating system, anonymized telemetry is collected. All of their security tools, anonymized telemetry is collected. And this is what powers the brain behind Microsoft Security Suite. So I just wanted to briefly mention financials. I've covered some of this on the previous slides, but I just want to highlight again that 20 billion over 5 years, a huge volume of money. And interestingly, another 20 billion figure here is that in 2023, Microsoft security business alone surpassed 20 billion in revenue. So forget about all of the non-security stuff Microsoft does. Their security business alone in revenue in 1 year generated over 20 billion. Again, the numbers we're thinking of here are just so staggering that they're competing on a completely different level. Okay, so this is a really key topic here and something that I want to make sure we all understand, which is Microsoft have this thing called the Intelligent Security Graph. Now, I've just mentioned on the previous slide about telemetry. Well, all of the telemetry from all of the Microsoft products is fed into this Intelligent Security Graph. This is the brain of the operation. This is where all of the signals are synthesized. It's where all of the detection capability is derived from. It is like I said, the core of Microsoft security offering. So the volume of data in here, we know it was 78 trillion in 2024 so far. That's just for this 1 year, the amount of synthesized signals. That surpasses any other vendor. In addition to that, Microsoft, although they're such a big competitor in this market, they actually do partner with third parties. So companies like FireEye have a partnership with Microsoft, and they share data between them. And this is quite common in the security industry in general, in that all of the big security vendors have some kind of partnership where they share some amount of data between them. So if we think about Microsoft ecosystem, yes, they capture an awful lot of telemetry, but through their partnerships, they also bring in third-party data, which of course enriches Microsoft's Intelligent Security Graph. This is all natively integrated with Microsoft security tools, so you don't have to do anything. It's just part of what Microsoft's products come with. There's no configuration needed. This is just the brains of the operation. The ISG has been around for years. It's been around since the Defender products were launched, which is, over 4 years ago now. And they've had machine learning and artificial intelligence within them for that entire time. So if you think of the development of the Defender stack, for example, over the last 4 or 5 years, it's only been improving. And of course, with the most recent innovations in AI, taking us leaps and bounds further, the logic behind all of this data processing is only going to get more powerful. And then finally there, all of this data is essentially accessible. So Microsoft has exposed APIs for all of their security tools. And what is effectively happening when you query those APIs is that you are querying the Intelligent Security Graph. You're querying your organization's little snippet of that graph. So when you ask for certain data, maybe you're creating a custom dashboard, for example, you ask for certain data from various Microsoft tools to pull that into your dashboard. You're essentially querying this brain, this Intelligent Security Graph. So you do actually have some direct connection to it. It's not just this ethereal thing in the background. So to just help illustrate and drive home why this is so important, again, I'm going to do a little bit of a timeline and story here. So on screen, we've got an office worker, and we've got their device. Now, their device is protected by Defender for Endpoint. This organization is heavily using Microsoft security tools, and this person's just going about their day and browsing emails. Unfortunately, they have fallen foul of a spear phishing attack. So they've been directly targeted. They've clicked on a link within an email, and they've downloaded the payload onto their device. That has caused some ransomware to encrypt their machine. And there's potential now for this attack to spread across this organization. Now, let's just say this organization is not within the UK. Let's say they're over in Japan somewhere. Okay, so a faraway country. Of course, there is links between the UK and Japan on the business side, but it's far away, different culture, different work environment. Things operate differently than in the UK there. Now, I'll explain later why that's important. So in a faraway place, a ransomware attack has happened. We know that Defender for Endpoint is on the device. So really what's going to happen now is Defender for Endpoint is going to use a combination of indicators of attack and indicators of compromise to make a determination if this ransomware is as dangerous as it first looks. So it may be that Defender marks it as suspicious or malicious. Either way, that telemetry is taken from the endpoint and uploaded into the Microsoft cloud. This all happens within seconds, effectively. Once it gets to the cloud, that telemetry is then within the intelligent security graph. And this is where some of the heavier computation is done. So, in the olden days of antivirus, the computation was done directly on your computer. And that's why people used to hate AV, because it would slow your machine down and conflict with open applications and things like that. But a lot of the computation nowadays is done in the cloud. In Microsoft's case, that is the intelligent security graph. So the graph is going to take some time to process this new telemetry. And once it's able to understand and learn the behaviors of this particular ransomware, what the IOCs are, what the IOAs are, it can bake that into its logic. And what that means is going forward, a detection and response capability is now automatically going to be deployed. So that now, let's say in the UK, one of our workers also falls foul of a similar phishing attack. The same ransomware is downloaded, but this time around, Defender has awareness of this ransomware. It's able to detect the ransomware immediately and respond to it immediately by potentially quarantining the actual payload that's been downloaded. And that process is happening globally all the time. So whether there's an organization in Japan, in Brazil, in the UK, in the US, if a new strain of ransomware or malware in general, or a new type of attack in general, is discovered by any of the Microsoft security tools, that telemetry goes into the brain, into the intelligent security graph, and out comes a detection capability and a response capability. So what this means is that all organizations using Microsoft's tech are mutually benefiting each other, because if one of them is compromised or even just attacked, the other organizations within the Microsoft ecosystem benefit because the product is always learning. So it's a really important element to understand that it's not static. The telemetry is continually being driven by Microsoft. So I just want to very briefly touch on some of the technology here. We have things like Defender for Endpoint, Defender for Identity, Defender for Office 365, Defender for Cloud Apps. We've also got Purview, which really covers the breadth here of the Microsoft offerings. We've got Entra ID and Intune. I won't go into the details of specifically what each of these do, but it's safe to say that this covers a wide breadth of areas. And then surrounding that, we have Microsoft Sentinel. Again, this is the Siemens Saw offering. Now, just as an honorary mention, I wanted to just bring up Azure. Again, we're focusing on security in this session, really, but Azure is a huge platform. And I'm just going to list out here only some of the components of Azure. We've got Defender for Cloud in the upper left. That is a security tool. Like I said, it's for securing multi-cloud environments. Again, I'm just illustrating here the scale of Microsoft's offerings. And then finally, Copilot. So Copilot is actually a suite of different Microsoft technologies. There's multiple Copilots. We have Copilot for Security, which is Gen AI based. It's able to interact with your security analysts to take proactive actions such as threat hunting. We've got Copilot for M365, which is a large language model. This is good for things like Teams and Outlook. Maybe you want to summarize your emails after you've been away on holiday. Copilot for M365 can do that for you. We've got Copilot Studio, which allows you to create a custom AI, which really, the world is your oyster with this one. And we've got a few others there as well. So Copilot is not just one thing. It is a suite of AI tools that do many different things. And this is, again, an emerging technology that Microsoft are driving quite heavily. And to back this up, there is 6 principles that Microsoft are kind of preaching here. So it's good to understand that Microsoft do have a bit of a strategy. Of course, we're still innovating in this area. These are developing products, but there is a kind of Microsoft strategy and set of principles driving these. So I'd just like to do a bit of a touch on Copilot for security. Now, there's lots of stats on screen, but the short version is that it saves time. So, if you've got a small security team or maybe no security team, Copilot for security can be very efficient because it will able to reduce some of the noise within your security alerting. It'll be able to troubleshoot minor threats. If you think of informational or low priority alerts, Copilot for security can auto remediate those and resolve those in quick time. That's kind of one of the main benefits there. And you can see in the middle that it works across, it doesn't really matter the skill set of the analyst, whether they're entry level, mid-level, or expert. They can all benefit from Copilot. It's an assistant, right? It doesn't replace these people. It's to make their job more efficient so they can focus on the high priority incidents rather than the noise. So just to recap, what are some of the benefits in terms of a Microsoft approach to cybersecurity? Well, you've got simplified total cost of ownership. The licensing is, although fairly complicated, it is more simple than having multiple licenses with multiple disparate vendors. We've got a single pane of glass for administration. We've got native integration across technologies. It's easier to adhere to industry best practice when you have one suite to configure. You've got one plane of administration. We've got a consistent end user experience, so we shouldn't underestimate this. This is a very important element. If users have a good experience, they're less likely to make mistakes and less likely to cause incidents. If you go with a Microsoft first approach, then you have a future-proofed technology roadmap baked in. And of course, Microsoft's huge expenditure and investment means that the threat intelligence is just unmatched. So if all of this sounds interesting and you're wondering, okay, great, Luke, we buy into this logic of yours, but how do we actually adopt this Microsoft First approach? Well, at CyberOne, we're well aware of some of the challenges here. So just bringing up a few on screen, I won't read through all of these, but it's likely that you're facing some of these, whether you want to head down the Microsoft route or you currently are on that path. The technology is continually evolving. It's hard to stay on top of. You need expertise to help you there. The shadow IT challenges, users maybe just accessing and using unauthorized applications. We can lock those things down with Microsoft Tech. You might have limited resources internally. You might be worried about the dangers of AI. All of these are well understood challenges. And what we have within CyberOne is an offering that we call Assure 365. So Assure 365, as the name suggests, is to cover the entire breadth of Microsoft security technology. So at its heart, we have security leadership. We will help your security leaders understand the benefits of the Microsoft First approach, understand some of the nuances of it, but most crucially, we will actually do the heavy lifting for you. So when it comes to implementing the technologies, configuring them to that minimal secure baseline we talked about at the start of the call, to hardening them further beyond those minimal baselines, so then introducing a managed SOC capability. These are all things that are part of our Assure 365 package. So effectively, we will do the difficult, the tiresome work for you. We will do that to a high standard and make sure that we're meeting best practice across the board. And we won't just leave you there. We're not just going to configure things and run away. The idea is that this is an ongoing service, that we will continually manage your Microsoft technology as it changes, because as we know, security technology evolves continuously. As Microsoft brings in new technology, as they change existing technology, our team will be in place to make sure that the delta of your configuration doesn't slip. We want to avoid configuration drift. We'll make sure that you're kept up to date with all of the relevant best practice. In addition to that, just to expand on the previous slide, we'll cover, this is a sample effectively of the technologies that we'll cover. So the big hitters, of course, Defender XDR, Sentinel, Purview. On the identity side, we've got Entra, device management for Intune. If you're concerned about data privacy, we also cover Priva. And of course, if you're interested in some of the newer and more fancy technologies, so Copilot for security and Copilot for M365, we can also discuss how we can help you with some of those technologies as well. And again, the idea is that our Microsoft experts, which includes myself and a team of others, will be in place to help define your strategy when it comes to adopting Microsoft technology, help to actually implement all of the things on screen and more besides this, and make sure that over time we avoid configuration drift and that we provide a continued managed service around all of these technology areas. So just at a high level in terms of how we deliver Assure 365, there's 5 primary phases. We come in to assess your organization, we assess your current state. We then will move to a baselining where we will apply those minimum viable security baselines. From there, in phase 3, we will harden your environment. So we will get you to a super hardened state. And this will depend on, of course, the complexity and your own requirements. But we have a best practice that we will teach you about, and we will show you how hardened and how locked down your environment can be. Number 4 then is the managing. It's avoiding configuration drift and making sure that we keep on top of the ever-changing technology landscape. And number 5, a hugely important part, is the MXDR component. So this is our award-winning SOC. This is where we'll have our security analysts and experts in place to make sure that all the configuration that we do isn't in vain, because ultimately a competent threat actor who's very determined to go after your business is still a threat, even with the right baselines and hardening in place. And this is why we need a SOC to be able to detect and respond to these things in real time. If we think back to the orange section of the attack timeline at the beginning of the presentation, this is all about growing that section, increasing our defense in depth, making it harder for the attacker to breach our organization in the first place. But if they do manage to open the front door and get inside, we have an MXDR award-winning SOC in place to make sure we slam that door as quick as possible on the attacker. Okay, so conscious that I've possibly rambled on slightly too long, so apologies, but I will happily stay on if there is a long list of questions. So happy to go into some of the Q&A now.
Thanks very much, Luke. Really appreciate your time there and some really fascinating insights. I do have some questions from the wider team. One is, what contingencies does Microsoft have in place if service goes down?
Yep. Yeah, so very valid question. So the way to think about that is, so firstly, Microsoft owns all of its own data centers. So they own the hardware, the infrastructure, the building. They physically own the premises that the data centers exist in. Within those data centers, we have their Azure platform, and all of the Microsoft security tools essentially sit on top of that. So if a data center goes down within Microsoft, there is automatic failover to a data center nearby. In the UK, there's one up in Scotland, I believe. There's 2 data centers around London. There's, I think, 1 or 2 in the Midlands as well. So we're quite lucky in the UK that we've got multiple Microsoft data centers, so that if for some reason there was an outage in one of them, we've got a handful of others to pick up that load. And of course, Microsoft has SLAs that they will adhere to. You know, if you're purchasing their products and using them, they of course have terms and conditions, and as part of that is the SLAs. I can possibly try and grab the documentation for those after the call and pass that on to the person who asked the question.
Perfect, thanks, Luke. It says, which Microsoft technology gives the most improvement to security overall?
Okay, so I guess I'll give my personal opinion first. So I would say that in terms of overall security, the biggest hitters are probably making sure you have secure identities, because as we know, identity security really is the new perimeter. It used to be back in the day, we'd think of the perimeter as a firewall, but really identity is one of the new sort of perimeter elements of security. So I would say Entra, in a sense, although Entra is not a pure security tool, if we think of MFA and conditional access, if we think of risky behaviors that users may get involved with, securing those is hugely important. Beyond the identity side, I would say Defender for Endpoint is vastly important. You know, we touched on ransomware today. The direct protection for that is something like Defender for Endpoint. But I suppose really, you know, if you have a Microsoft license, so whether it's Business Premium, M365, E3, E5, you're paying for a suite of products. So yes, some of those products will give you more bang for your buck than others, but ultimately you're paying for all of them. So the answer is use all of those products available, and that's kind of what we want to do with Assure 365 is help you do that, because it isn't always easy to implement this big suite of tech. But yeah, we're here to help.
Thanks, Luke. I think we've just got time for one more. We've had a few emails with questions and requests for the presentation, which we will send over. But I think the final question would be, we're concerned with how Microsoft handles our data in the cloud. What happens to our data when Microsoft collects it from our devices, identities, and other things?
Okay. Yeah, so yeah, very, very valid question. So the short version is that the telemetry that Microsoft collects is anonymized. So that there's two components to this. In terms of kind of the telemetry that you see within your own Defender portal, that of course is not anonymized, because that is your organization's personal view of your own telemetry. Microsoft can't see that. So there is actually a barrier in place that Microsoft employees, and you know, there's no automatic system can actually see the telemetry within your own portals. That is for your organization's eyes only. But when Microsoft takes that telemetry into the intelligent security graph, it anonymizes the telemetry. So it removes names, it removes emails, it removes IPs and domains and things like that. Anything identifiable for your organization or employees is stripped away, and it's just the raw telemetry that goes into the intelligent security graph. So because of that, you know, your data is only existing within your tenant, but Microsoft can still benefit from the telemetry from your use of their tools. So there's a bit of a symbiotic relationship there.
Great. We have just had a final one about how we price Assure 365 for an SME. Luke, I don't know if there's a short way of answering that, or
yeah, I think there probably isn't a short way, but just I brought up on screen here, you know, as part of the ongoing support we want to provide after this session is we're opening up our time for some consultations. So these are free of charge. It will be with myself and possibly some of the other Microsoft experts in our organization. So in terms of how we price Assure 365, there's probably a deeper conversation there, and I'm happy to have a 30-minute, 60-minute session to discuss that with those who are interested.
Thanks, Luke.
Okay, and thank you for your time, everyone. Just I want a reminder just before we wrap up that we have our in-person event in the Shard next week, next Thursday afternoon. So I will be there presenting on similar topics to today. I'll also go into some additional topics. So we've not discussed the complexity of Microsoft licensing because it's too nuanced. Really, we need an open conversational forum for that. And I'll be doing that in person on Thursday. So if you've got questions about how all of this technology fits together within the licensing and how CyberOne can help you with that, we can have those questions either through a free consultation, or if you're available, please come to the event on Thursday next week, and I'll be happy to chat in person with you all then. So with all that said, as I said, thank you for your time, everyone. Really appreciate the attendance and some good questions. If there is any additional follow-up, I'm happy for people to reach out to me directly. Any means you want to get in contact, I'll be happy to jump on a call and discuss your requirements and questions. Okay, so we'll close off the session. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Luke. Cheers. Bye-bye.